Swordsmanship is hard. Very hard. Anyone who practices any type of sword art will tell you this, I'm quite sure. But what can really make it even harder is when you're practicing movements that you're not exactly sure how to apply. At least, how to apply practically in a combat situation. This is something that people who study styles like Chinese swordsmanship, well, especially Chinese swordsmanship, have to deal with. They are learning a whole lot of movements that, they look nice, they're kind of dance-like, but you're not exactly sure how they're supposed to be used. And it doesn't help when the people you're learning from, many times, don't know how to use it themselves. So you find yourself putting in a whole lot of time and effort, practicing a whole bunch of crazy movements, and you don't know how to apply them. So what's the point? Are you just learning a bunch of useless motions that have absolutely no use in combat at all? Should you just simply pick up something else that's a little bit more practical and easier to figure out? Like, say, Western sword arts? Thankfully, you do not have to go through drastic measures to try to figure out, how to use practical techniques or to figure out how to use Chinese techniques practically. In fact, what I found is that in Chinese martial arts, there are what I'd like to call universal, basic codes, or basic code language that you can use to decipher just about any form. So in this video, I'll talk about some of the basics of that code today. Now, the most basic thing out of any Chinese form are the stances. Before we go on, I need to stress that stances in Chinese martial arts are something that you fight with, not fight from. In other words, they're not static. Here is the horse stance, which tends to be a static stance, and this is almost never used, as a straight stance in fighting. It's used to transition from one thing to another. And notice the stance that looks similar to the horse stance that I'm in. This is called a 4-6 stance, and it's about the only static stance, quote-unquote, that I can think of in Chinese martial arts, because it's a guard position. We have 60% of your weight on the right rear leg and 40 in your front, hence the 4-6 stance or 60-40 stance or whatever. Now, from horse again, I can transfer myself into another stance, and that's gongbu. By the way, mabu is horse stance. This is gongbu, also known as bow and arrow stance or mountain climbing stance. And as you can see, if you look at the position of my legs, you can see that this is an advancing stance. If you see this in a form, it's basically telling you to move forwards, to attack while moving forwards, to advance. Here it is, again, with my right leg forward. Notice my legs, and notice that my front knee does not go past my foot. Not only is that bad form, but it can mess up your knee. So keep it stable, like as you can see here. Now again, this is an advancing stance. You can use it for lunges, deep lunge and deep thrusts. You can also use it for, lunge and cuts, quick cuts like that. But you're always stepping forwards when you do it. That's what this is basically telling you. So if you see that in a form, it's telling you to go forwards. And you can also use it defensively, as I just did there. You can parry, step forward, counter. See? Now, here it is from the front. And notice, again, I'm advancing in a straight line. In combat, though, you can step to the left or the right. Here, I step to the right while thrusting, and here, I step to the left. I'm still in gongbu, but notice that I've changed positions, and if you were fighting me changing that angle makes it easier for me to hit you. Forms have you go in straight lines, but remember, you can go to the left or right. But what about retreating, as you just saw me do there? Pulling back, retreat from an attack. Well, then you see this stance usually in a form. The cat stance, otherwise known as the false stance. From here, what you're doing is you're pulling all your weight into your back leg and squatting down while your front leg has no weight. See how I can easily lift that foot off the ground? If you see this in a form, it's basically telling you to retreat. And it's usually a defensive motion, like you stab, you miss, you're trying to pull back. You pull back in a defensive position, your sword is moved defensively, and you pull back. And notice the kick I just did. Whenever you see a cat stance or a false stance, the reason why that front leg is light is to let you know you can kick from it. It's a hidden move. So that's something else that you can decipher in forms. If you see that foot like that, it's basically telling you that while you're pulling back, you can kick defensively. Or you can step. Here it is from the front. So you can get an idea of what it looks like from the front. And again, it's pulling back, and you can use that front foot to step in a different direction or kick. There's another motion with a leg raised up lightly, though. And I know you guys know this one. It's that one, golden rooster. Some people call it crane. I was taught it was called golden rooster. And you lift your center of gravity upwards, and you lift your front leg up and bend it in front of you like that. Obviously, all your weight's going to be in your rear leg. Here it is with the right leg up. Now notice I'm lifting my center of gravity. There's a reason for this. See, when I go into this stance, yeah, when I lift my leg, I can kick after defending myself with a parry, but I can also chop down from that stance. Because remember, I'm lifting my center of gravity, but I can bring that weight, my center of gravity, downwards to power my blow. And that's what this move is trying to tell you if you see it in the form, especially if you see an attack after you raise your leg. It's telling you can step forward and bring all that weight down with your blow. And I usually see that a lot with heavy cuts. You can also, by the way, use the center of gravity and not only lift it up, but forwards, leaning forwards. If you see this variation of the one-leg stance, where your rear leg is raised, it's telling you to lean forwards, and that's usually against a longer weapon when you're trying to reach a long-range target. So, another basic stance you may see in forms is another pulling back stance, and it's this one, which is known as Tame the Tiger stance. Now, this one looks like a reverse gongbu or reverse bow and arrow stance, doesn't it? And it sort of is, except you're kind of squatting down into that stance. You're pulling way back, you're retreating, and you're pulling your sword at the same time in a defensive position. It's usually like, oh, I missed, quickly, parry and pull back. And that low stance not only gets you out the way of an attack, usually of a long-range attack, but these pulling back motions help you to ward off blows, and then you can quickly come back forward with a counter. And it looks vulnerable, but remember, stances are supposed to be used in transition, not statically. So that's something that you would use to pull back and quickly go forwards. So now I'm going to go through some basic sword motions that you may see in these forms. Spinning the sword this way, cutting it that way, doing a sword motion like that, which is the swallow sword, which I should get into that in a different video, but that is actually an advanced maneuver usually used against long-range weapons. And they look weird, don't they? I mean, they look like, how would you make those work? Especially when you got more basic motions like this, thrusts, quick cuts, cut to the right or the left, But the thing is, all these motions, including my most basic ones, come alive and have different values to them. Like they work differently depending on what stance you use in your footwork. That's where the forms and emotions actually come alive. And I'll start demonstrating them here. Now, please excuse the bad lighting and the camera angle. I had a lot of bad footage and I had to, salvage what I could. But here I'm demonstrating some of the basic sword motions with the stances. Like there I kind of dropped into false. There I did that same circular motion, but this time I raised my leg, which gives a different technique. And I'm doing different counters. What these forms are trying to show you is how these basic sword motions can be used with different stances and different footwork to achieve different results, giving you different angles of attack. Where you can step, depending on where you step and depending on how you apply your stance, it will, change the value of your attack, change the angle of your attack, make it more effective for whatever it is that you're dealing with. Raising your center of gravity, pitching it forwards, changing your footwork to change your angle, and so on. I'm doing a little bit of fancy stuff there, but there's a reason for this. I'm also showing how you can blend moves, one move into another, and changing your angles and changing your attacks and defense to come up with different motions. Remember, forms are a bunch of different attacks blended together to form one long continuous motion. And it's because when you fight, you have to be able to do that. Now here, I'm demonstrating how some of these motions are applied with my brother. Again, some of this footage didn't come out too well, so I had to salvage what I could. But I'm showing just basically how these things work and how they change depending on how you use your stance. So here I'm doing a very basic circle, parry, and counter. And notice that when I do it, I don't just stand there and do it, I shift to the right or the left. See, he will come in with an attack, and I either step to the left or the right while applying the sword motion, and the stance that I go into helps me to facilitate the move and to finish the motion. And as you can see here, like I shifted over to his right, my left, in order to make that motion work, to get inside and chop him in the back of the neck. Here I'm demonstrating that cloud sword move, but I'm going to be doing different variations of it here to show him how I can do it differently depending on how I shift my stance. So I start from 4-6, and he's going to make an attack that's supposed to attack me from above. And you will notice that I just block high, and in here I could just simply make a quick cut to the throat. But I can also change it up. If he's good at defending from that, I can then just lift my leg, step forward, and then just thrust to the throat. Because that circular motion, he may step away from or use his sword to maneuver it out the way. But then I can do is just withdraw the sword, and as you can see, I lift my center of gravity, position my foot to step forward, and then boom. Thrust. See, just a different way of applying that same sword motion. And then I can do one better. Remember, the leg is loose, which means kick, doesn't it? So look, kick, thrust. So it's just different ways of applying all these different motions, and the forms are basically showing you that you can do this. It's just that the motions are hidden unless you know how to decode the motions that it's showing you. So this should give you just a small little idea of what is actually packed into these forms. In my next video, I hopefully will be able to go a little bit more into depth on how hidden some of these motions are, show a few more hidden stuff, and then actually go back to some of the forms I know and see if you guys can figure out the techniques. Till then, take care.
Hey, kid, you may have studied at many schools, but however much you've learned, I'm sure you have only just managed to get the basic essentials.